Yeah. Hello, Servus Gusach. Welcome back to the podcast. He is a bird. I am your host, Sean Shelton. I am here again with my father, Jim Shelton, which means it can only mean one thing. We're going game 4, episode 4 of the AFL team name Rumble. Father, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, I'm ready to rumble.
Yes. Good. I'm glad. Yes. And this one might be maybe even more interesting than a steel shark, because at least you have an idea of what a steel shark is. This week's matchup, or today's matchup, I should say, is the Dragons, which is pretty straightforward. We'll talk about versus the Blue Devils, and
the Dragons are the Danube Dragons, right?
Correct.
Yeah, from Vienna.
From Vienna,
right?
Correct.
Okay.
And the Blue Devils are from Hohenems, Vorarlberg. So the question really is, and what I want to start with is, to the same notion that I had for the Steel Sharks, what the hell is a Blue Devil, Pops?
That's a really good question. And you haven't played these, the Raiders, and this goes back to my motivational messages. You haven't played them in a while, right? You used to play them.
2016, 2017.
They dropped down to the Division One. So you haven't played them in a while, but in the past it was always difficult, to do, because what is a Blue Devil? If you look at the logo, it's a blue devil, right? So is it just a devil that's painted blue? But I couldn't accept that, so I had to do some research. And when you do research, you're probably in the U.S. at least, the most famous team mascot or team utilizing the Blue Devils are the University of, or the Duke University,
right,
in North Carolina, Blue Devils.
And what's helped us in the past is checking out the logo, right? That's how we talked about the Steel Sharks. That's how we talked about the Black Panthers.
Right.
This is a pitchfork on fire, which is not a ton of help. So
no, and like I said, but if you look at the Duke University of Duke Blue Devil mascot, it's a blue devil.
It has a
pitchfork.
Exactly.
It's a blue devil. But then you ask, why did the University of Duke, or I guess it's Duke University, why did Duke University select that as the team name? And it's kind of interesting because it was, Duke University was a Methodist university, a Christian university. And how did they select a blue demon or a blue devil? Because there's actually, blue demons too, but the blue devil, why did they select that? And the interesting thing was, it goes back to, there was actually, in World War I, there was a French elite, mountain infantry unit that was called, their nickname was the Blue Devils. My French is horrible, just like my German is horrible. But it was like they called them the de Blas, blue. Like, so they were the Blue Devils.
Perfect. It was probably exactly right.
Yeah, I don't think it's anywhere close. But they're also called the Chasseurs Alpines. So they were a French elite mountain infantry unit that was formed to address threats from Italy. So if Italy was going, this goes way back to like the late 1880s. But if Italy, chose to invade France and they tried to come through the Alps, they would be stopped by this elite French mountain unit. So the interesting thing is their uniforms were blue and they wore blue capes. So
that's so French. That is so French.
Yeah, but fast forward to World War I, and and the U.S. was not in the war to start out with, and these France had these Blue Devils touring the U.S. Trying to get support for World War One. You know, whether if the U.S. was going to enter the war or just provide supplies to France, they sent, you know, a group of these French Blue Devils with their blue uniforms and their blue capes touring the U.S. And so they kind of became, you know, famous. And after the war, obviously the U.S. did get in the war, but after the war, when the veterans came back, you know, Duke University was still trying to come up with a name, and one of the top names was the Blue Devils, based on this elite French mountain infantry unit. But the veterans that came back that were going out for football, you know, so these are veterans that have been at war, but now they're coming back and they're freshmen. It made perfect sense to them. They knew exactly who the Blue Devils were, and they knew that they were known to be an elite unit, you know, like special forces. So that's how they became the Blue Devils.
Okay, so is that what we're going with the Blue Devils? Is
I
it?
think it makes it a lot more interesting than a little blue devil with a pitchfork going against a dragon.
I agree. I agree. Okay, so if we're going to go with the Blue Devils as an elite mountain military unit, what would a normal Blue Devil look like and be I imagine be weaponized with?
Right. Well, let me ask you this too. The Blue Devils are actually in Western Austria.
Right. No,
Right?
they're in the mountains. Yep.
They're in the Alps, so it makes sense too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, these are infantrymen. So you know, like once again, as far as physical size, you know, they're just normal, but they are elite soldiers, so they have been trained as infantrymen, and they've also been trained to fight in mountain terrain. So they're mountain climbers, they're cross country skiers, so very good athletes to be part of this elite mountain squad. As far as weaponry go, they have assault rifles.
Yep.
Right. They'd have machine guns, and they'd also have sniper rifles.
This is all based on World War One weaponry, correct? Because World War One was the introduction of automatic weapons, I believe.
Yeah, so they would be early assault rifles, early machine guns,
but in fact automatic
weaponry.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So that's what I envisioned for one team today is the legendary Blue, whatever. Don't do it. Okay, the Blue Devils.
That makes sense because I was doing research on devils, right? And I didn't focus on Blue Devils. I just focused on what is a depiction of a devil, and the devil is quite literally the embodiment of evil, right?
Right.
And so in every single culture, there's a different depiction of what that could be, whether that is a serpent or a snake. In some, it's actually a dragon. In some, I mean, it's often categorized in Christianity as a fallen angel. What does that look like? What can that be? And then I came across like several paintings of like half horse, half man, half goat with a pitchfork. I guess not half, third, with like a pitchfork, or the often like romanticized or painted. Often it kind of looks like a Krampus with wings, if you will. And so
it really doesn't look like a bull that you see as a map for the Duke Blue Devils or any other team.
No, and I was sitting there thinking like, what do you do with that? You know what I mean? Like, what do you do with that? So I think maybe not the most accurate depiction, but I think it, first of all, it makes sense geographically, and secondly, it does make things more interesting because the dragons are the early onset favorites. So maybe this makes things more interesting. So okay, we're gonna go with 11 French Alpine infantrymen.
Elite, yeah.
Elite
soldiers.
if
Yeah.
France had elite soldiers, you know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
I was
You
not
could say
gonna.
it.
I was not gonna go there.
You know what I'm saying? Okay, so
I did
so
look up and see if they had any major, victories, in their history of this elite force,
mhm.
and they really didn't.
Okay, well that doesn't bode well. Okay,
Okay.
um, so on the other side, we have dragons, which have been, popularized in shows like um, Game of Thrones. There's even a cartoon show like How to Train a Dragon. Dragons are very popular
Right.
amongst pop culture, but what is the history of a dragon? What can we expect on the field?
Well, we should have a little discussion on what's this dragon look like. What's
Mhm.
the Danube dragon look like? Because
Well, if it goes by the
similar to
mascot, it has some like growth defects.
yeah, that's that. Well, that's yeah. Yeah, because that's probably not the fiercest looking dragon I've ever seen.
No,
The
no, but it
mascot.
is
So
very much a dragon.
right, right, okay. Well, but dragons similar to giants, as far as being mythical creatures. There's dragons all over the world,
Hmm.
and dragons vary though by what type of dragon they are. There's the Chinese dragon, which is different than say
Yeah,
a European
the
dragon.
Chinese dragons don't even have wings, from what I
No,
read. Like they don't
they're
fly.
more like they're more
Snakes.
snake-like,
Yeah, exactly.
more serpent. And then so I thought, okay, we're probably going to go with a European dragon, right? Considering this is the Austrian Football League, so a European
Hmm.
dragon. But even that, there's like the classic European dragon,
But
which
they
is
are
like game.
sponsored by a Korean company now, so
Okay, so
no.
yeah, so
But I think
there's some discussion there. But you have like the classic European dragon would be like Game of Thrones dragon, right? I mean, very, very large, winged,
wings,
four-legged,
yeah,
winged
spiked
dragon,
spine,
horns. Yeah.
yeah.
Fire breathing is another discussion. In most cases they're fire breathing, but then I started also looking at the Lindworm, which is a German type of dragon,
Hmm.
and that's kind of what Klagenfurt had the famous Lindworm, which isn't winged, didn't fly, was more snake-like, and didn't breathe fire. So I think the first kind of are we going a European dragon, classic European dragon, or are we looking at more of a Lindworm type dragon?
I think we are going with a normal European dragon that does have wings. It is a serpentine-ish animal. It
Right.
is it is it is often a descendant of like an alligator. So we're looking at an alligator type, crocodile
But
type looking animal,
four legs, not
four-legged,
snake. Okay.
winged.
Okay. Okay.
Uh, but I think fire breathing is up for discussion. There have been several depicted that are fire breathing, like in Norse tales, like Beowulf, right? That dragon breathes fire, right? Game of Thrones breathes fire, but there are also throughout history, there's also a ton of stories like you're saying, like the Linward, that they don't breathe fire. They're just rather large snakes, legged
Well,
snakes.
there's also stories that that they had elemental breath, meaning fire was one thing, but in some cases they could breathe ice.
Okay.
In other cases, they could actually breathe poison. So there was a kind of a common theme of elemental breath, mostly with mints, but mostly being fire, but in some cases maybe even ice. But
Okay.
fire breathing dragon is pretty common when you look at a classic European dragon.
Okay.
But it has a lot, fire breathing, has a lot of capability, has a lot of impact on the outcome of the game today, right?
That is exactly right. And but so does having an automatic machine gun. So
Right.
I think we're gonna go with this.
Instead of a trident.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so I think we're going to stay with your stereotypical depiction of a dragon. It's a very large serpentine looking
Okay.
animal with four legs that
Okay.
can fly, and does breathe dragon or does breathe fire. The one thing I will
Okay.
say is on this arena, we are playing in a dome. So it will have a roof. It is not an open-ended vertical pillar, if you will. So we are capping their flying ability at 15 meters. So roughly, oh, let's go 10 meters. So 10 meters, roughly 30 feet. So three-story building-ish
Okay.
box,
Okay.
which might not come into play in this battle, but might come into play later if the dragons do advance.
Okay. I think it's also interesting. We've been talking about, physical characteristics. I think the other thing you mentioned is that they were known to have very tough scales.
Yeah, exactly.
It was hard for weapons of any kind to penetrate their scales. I think the other thing, unlike giants, dragons were known to be very intelligent. They were known to be very knowledgeable, very very cunning. A lot of times when you saw knights or whoever, they tried to outwit them, but they weren't dumb animals. They were or creatures. They were very smart, full of not very usually very old. They'd been around for centuries and had seen a lot and knew a lot. So a lot of knowledge. Um, Devastating in battle. That's why normally, if it's just a battle, whoever was going against a dragon really didn't have a lot of chance. They had to try to outwit them, outsmart them, convince them. In some cases, just talk them out of the fight. Like, hey, we really don't want to do this. We'll bring you a virgin, every year or something to satisfy you or whatever, or food or whatever. But let's not fight. And in some cases, they were thought to have magical or either supernatural powers. And like I said, they were thought to be wiser than humans, smarter than us. So you've got a very, very not just physically, very opposing, uh, you know, threat here. Also mentally, like I said, the giants are, the thing you could outsmart them. That's probably not the case with the dragons.
Okay, so you're painting a pretty a picture of a very strong competitor. So
Yes, very strong competitor.
but dragons have been slayed in history, and they are not by no means invincible. So what would be some weaknesses of dragons, or how could the Blue Devils hypothetically attack?
Well, I mean, in a lot of cases, that when dragons have been defeated, it was once again it was outwitting them, where a bull or a cow or something was put out, um, with that had been poisoned, where the dragon would eat whatever was put out and
Mm-hmm.
ultimately get sick and weak and then was able to be vanquished. There's other stories where that during battles that maybe a scale had been removed, and uncovering a weak point. If you could hit them and where that scale was gone, then they were weak in that area. Even like I said, the famous story about in Klagenfurt in Austria, where they put a bull out in with hooks and things, and when the dragon tried to eat the the bull, the hooks to come and do it in after it. So a lot of times it's trying to trick the
Mm-hmm.
dragon, with some type of lure or bait that would either capture them or be poison them or something like that.
Man has been successful with sword against dragons before, though, right? There are like heroic tales of a man slaying a dragon with a sword. Does that man have to have extraordinary strength to penetrate the scales?
Well, a lot of the stories about like Saint George right? And the dragon, he killed the dragon, but he had divine intervention, right? He was a saint,
Okay.
and he actually had, the all powerful, almighty Lord, backing him, and with through God defeated, and it was kind of getting back to your discussion about the devil. It was good versus evil, right? The
Right.
dragon was evil, and Saint George, with God's help, being goodness, defeated the dragon.
Gotcha. So no ordinary man would be able to defeat a dragon physically.
Not normally, unless they're, like I said, unless it was a dragon that had, some scales had been removed, and the knight had was lucky enough to plunge his sword into a vulnerable area with no scales.
Okay. Okay, good. So now that we get into this battle, it's 11 on 11, like always. We have capped the arena. The arena is capped at 10 meters, 30-ish feet, 32, 33 feet. So they will be able to fly, but they won't be able to soar like sometimes they like to do and then come down and breathe fire. They can breathe fire, but it's a flat, level playing field, no obstacles, no cover, no nothing. All 11 are 35-yard line. Whistle blows. I got to imagine the first thing that happens are the Blue Devils open fire.
Yeah, with everything they've got.
Yeah. And how effective do you think their World War I, if I can say primitive, automatic weaponry, how successful do you think that initial launch would be?
I don't think it'd be very successful. I mean, I think that they're firing, a lot of bullets, at the dragons, that probably are just bouncing off their armor like scales that they have. If they'd had to be lucky enough to try to hit them in the eye, or maybe in the mouth or something to try to do some damage. But I think, also the dragons are not going to just sit there and let them, take practice shots at them either, right? The dragons would be probably moving. So I think they'll hit them with everything they've got as soon as the whistle blows. But I don't think that, at least that initial barrage of firepower that the Blue Devils would unleash on the dragons would have much effect.
No, there's even stories of swords breaking on the scales of dragons. So I'm not sure this weaponry, unless you had a sniper that was a very, very good shot and could hit one of these vulnerable areas. Maybe during the course of the barrage of bullets, maybe a scale or two gets chipped off and somebody could, but that seems to be a long shot considering, like you said, the dragons are just going to sit there and get shot. What do you think their reaction to being open
to
fire
me, I
upon?
think I think as soon as the whistle blows, I think that's the problem too, is that if they were just sitting there, not moving, at what, 30 yards, I think that, with the sniper rifles, they might be able to, to maybe do a little damage, on the dragons. But to me, as soon as that whistle blows, I think they're going to hit them with firepower. That I would think that that's one of the first things they would do at that distance, right? Because that's their long range, weapon, is their capability to breathe fire. So I think 30 yards might be a little, out of the range, maybe.
I would think so. I would think
the thing, if they.
Are you back?
I'm sorry, you broke up a little. You were saying, what were you saying?
No, you were saying that at 30 yards, that might be out of the range of fire breathing ability, and I would agree with you. I'm not a dragon fire breathing expert, but let's say a realistic range would be 15 to 20 yards, right?
Yeah.
So 30 yards. So I imagine that even though that's their long range response, they would have to close distance in order for that to be effective.
Right, but with that first burst of the fire, even though it doesn't, consume the Blue Devils, it would be disorientating to have that wall of fire come at them, and it would be awful hard for them to utilize their sniper rifle ability. So I think even though they're ready, they get some first initial shots off, but then there's this wall of fire that's coming at them that doesn't singe them, doesn't hurt them, but it makes it awful hard for them to have precision shots through that wall of fire,
Absolutely.
To do any damage to the dragons. But I think the dragons, to your point, not only are initiating that burst of fire breath, they're also moving, right? I mean, they might not have a lot of room, and that's the thing too, is that you talked about the dome, but also these are very large animals or creatures lined up out there on the field. They probably don't have a lot of room to even to get their wings out and get to a point where they could actually, because they're all out there together, right?
That's a good
lined
point.
up across there. So I don't think flight is going to have much impact, to start out with. I think they're charging, using their legs. So they're moving forward, hitting the firepower, and the Blue Devils are, like I said, they're throwing everything but the kitchen sink at them with all the firepower they have.
What is the Blue Devils' response to the wall of flame? I would imagine if I was a Blue Devil and I had an automatic weapon, I would be trying to keep as much space as possible and just going through my bullets and hoping for the best. What do you think their response to that would be?
I would think that the Blue Devils would probably retreat.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
They're not going to just stand there and get massacred. They're like, okay, here's this wall of fire, and I can hear, and the whole field's probably rumbling, right? Because there's the dragons are charging. Mm-hmm. I think there would probably they would fall back. They'd still be firing, right? But they would probably fall back.
Okay, so they have 45 yards to fall back. They might not make it to 45 yards because them backpedaling, shooting is not going to be as fast as a dragon rumbling. But in that first initial wave of bullets and then the continuation of shooting until the dragons keep up, do you think they have any success at all before it becomes snack time, basically?
No, I really don't.
Okay.
I don't. I mean, I think they give it a valiant effort. I think they keep firing. They retreat. They might have a group that are firing as the others, are getting up and running, and then switching off with that. But meanwhile, these dragon tanks, unstoppable tanks with flamethrowers are still coming. Right, and whatever they're throwing at them, with bullets isn't doing anything. So I think they keep backpedaling to a point where they, like the Panthers, right? They run out of stadium, mm-hmm. and the Dragons keep coming, and eventually the Dragons get within range of the fire breath. And I think that by the time the Dragons actually get to the Blue Devils, they're already medium well done.
Yeah.
They're if the Dragons like their meat medium well, I think it's already done and it's prepared, ready to go, and they just have a after game snack. But I think they've already been cooked.
Yeah, this is
blue capes and all. It's all gone.
This is not boding well for the rest of the tournament with how much of a predominant force and strength that the Dragons are. Because I think you're right. I think a mountain alpine infantry unit would probably not do much against a mythical dragon.
Like a lot of these battles, these rumbles that we've talked about, when you take a team and you take them out of their element and you take them away from what they were good at, fighting in the mountains, right? versus putting them out in the open field, or you're putting a panther out in the open field, or you're putting, a steel shark out on an open field. I think a lot of times when you have that fish out of water type scenario, it's really not going to bode well for the team that, where the Dragons don't really have that, right? I mean,
No.
whatever battleground or battlefield you put them in, they don't really have a certain way of hunting or a certain way of fighting. They have multiple ways. I mean, you even tried to take the flight away from them, and I don't think it really mattered a whole lot. But I think
No.
in looking forward, the teams that, if you're the Vikings or the Raiders or the Giants, and you're looking at game film of this particular outing,
You're going, oh shit.
yeah, I think, but I think you're going to have to come up with a way to outsmart them, or to do something that's a little bit clever, is going to probably be your only hope. I mean, the Giants have brute force and enormous size, but unfortunately,
The Dragons. Yeah.
they don't have the smarts either. So,
Yeah.
brute force against brute force, that would be interesting. But the Dragons are a very, very tough opponent, and in this particular rumble and in the scenarios that you're placing the teams in, they don't really have a lot of disadvantages.
No, they do not. No, they do not. But we will cross that bridge when we get there. For now, our semifinals are locked. We have the Giants versus the Vikings, and the Raiders, the poor Raiders, versus the Dragons. And we will see. We will see if the Raiders can pull something out of their hat. We'll see. I think the Giants Vikings are a very, very intriguing matchup. And yeah, we will see. We will see what the future holds. But until then, Pops, thanks again for your knowledge. It's always a pleasure.
No, it's
And
fun. It's fun.
yeah, good. And we will pick it up probably the week after the draft, and let some people breathe. Let some people think about it, and then bring back the semifinals in the week after the draft.
Yeah, and if there's some, French, Blue Devil fans out there that think that this wasn't, really an accurate depiction of the capabilities of that elite squad, then let's hear it from you.
Yeah, I just looked at the engagements while you were saying. The one engagement that's noted in World War One, they were in aid of a Belgian army, so it wasn't even really. Yeah, it wasn't. It was Belgium and France against Germany, but they were in aid. They weren't. Yeah.
No, there wasn't any. And then in this particular case, instead of worrying about invasion from some mountain infantry from Italy, they should have been worried about being invaded from Austrian dragons, because that's what really took them down.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, Father, thank you again, and
Okay.
I look forward to the semifinals.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Sean. It was fun.
Good.